6, 5.
Hello and welcome to Virtual World's Best Practices in Education. Today we open our conference with a very special person. I think it's appropriate that we launch this year's Beyond the Stage theme with someone who has been on Behind and Beyond. While over 100 presenters will demonstrate over the course of this conference just how far they've reached into their own metaphorical stage, we are fortunate to have Gentle Heron lead us on our 4-day experience Beyond the Stage. Gentle Heron is best known in Second Life as the founder of the Virtual Ability Cross-Disability Peer Support Community. She is also president of the nonprofit corporation Virtual Ability Incorporated, which supports that community's operations in virtual worlds. Before she became the gentle avatar, Alice Krieger worked in education and research. She began her career as a classroom science teacher. She moved into special education, then into providing professional development for teachers of science and health. Alice has worked for a federally funded regional educational laboratory where she ran an educational and public outreach effort for a NASA mission. She was also involved in a national level educational research. Her education career became sidelined by multiple sclerosis, which led her into Second Life. Although she is no longer formally an educator or even employed, she does enjoy helping newcomers adapt to life in the virtual realm. Without further ado, I present to you our opening keynote speaker, Alice Krieger, best known in Second Life as Gentle Heron.
Thank you, Letty. In case you're in a different place than you expect it to be, this is the role of the educator then and now, there and here. The first slide is the title slide. Thank you, Letty, for your very kind introduction. That was a wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone. I am truly honored to have been asked to open this year's VWBPE conference. I have many excellent educators among my Second Life friends, and I'm pleased to see some of them in the audience this morning. And good afternoon to you, Sue. I want to begin with some data collection. I want to know, how long have you been an educator? Please click the voting board that is behind me. It is between the speaker platform where I am now and the other large red platform where there are other people are standing. It's above the walkway there. It's a black background, and it has a green target on the face of it. What you do is you click on the screen anywhere, and that should give you a menu. On the menu will be a set of 6 choices, which are your options for your length of teaching. You could choose never, if you've not been an educator. Beginner up to 5 years. I noticed several people in that category. 6 to 10 years. 11 to 20, 21 to 30, and for those of us who are mature, we won't say old, if we've been an educator for over 30 years. And you only get to vote one time. So those are your choices. Please vote, and I'll collect that data further on in the presentation. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to pause for a short time to allow you to read the menu and vote if you haven't done so already. I will say that you may need to keep clicking. I've had someone already IM me that they're having trouble. It does work from all of the different SIMs, but it's going to be laggy in here. We've got quite a few people. I'm going to go on. And please remember that you only need to vote once. So while you're voting, I'll continue. I thought perhaps a bit of a historical perspective on education would be in order to begin such an august gathering. The slide I'm showing now is a road map. Here's a map of east central Iowa to set the stage for my education career. Are there any Iowans in the audience today other than me? You can put that into local chat. This map shows where I began teaching, and that was over 40 years ago. I was fresh out of college, and my grandmother described me as full of vim and vinegar. I was 21 years old. I was going to be a high school science teacher in the public school of the Amana Colonies in Iowa. I was just barely 3 years older than my oldest students. I was certified to teach all the areas of science and all mathematics. The Amana Colonies in Iowa have changed a lot in the years since I taught there. They began as a utopian, communal, agrarian, religious community of 7 small villages in 1855, and no, I'm not that old. This start date makes the Amana Colonies one of the longest-lived communal societies in the U.S. The word Amana means remain true. The people of the Amana Colonies remained true to the values of their religion's founders, who began the movement in Germany in 1714. The Amana community always placed a high value on education. Students in the long ago Amana schools attended classes year-round and for long days in lieu of daycare. Back then, formal education stopped at grade 8. In 1932, the Amana Colonies underwent a drastic change. They abandoned communal living and incorporated their endeavors. The next slide shows a tourist map of Middle Amana and Amana, and it does show the school. Still tight-knit in the late 1960s, the community began hiring outsiders, as they called them, or non-community members, as teachers in their K-12 school. These recent maps, this one and the one you saw previously, as you may have been able to tell, show the further secularization of the community, which is now a tourist destination. I chose this map to show you today because it indicates the location of the school building, which is situated in the center. It's in Middle Amana, but it's between the community park and the Lily Lake. I hope you can see it on the map. This slide shows the building in which I taught. During my tenure, it was a K-12 building. That worked really well since most of the students were related to each other, sometimes distantly, but they all knew who belonged to whom. If a small child in the building was crying because he or she had lost lunch money, a big brother or a sister or uncle or aunt would help out. My science classroom was small, but adequately equipped. There were 16 chairs with armrests for writing, and 6 lab stations with sinks and gas for Bunsen burners. In fact, I was the entire high school science department. I taught 6 different laboratory science classes in a 5-period day. My physics and chemistry classes met during the same class period. In my naivete as a beginning educator, I saw myself as leading my students. I had loved science ever since I was a child. I was never happier than when I could be outside mucking about with something. I wanted to share with my students my joy in finding out about the world we lived in. I knew it was my responsibility as their teacher to also instill in them commonly accepted understandings, well-known facts, and useful ways of thinking. While I recognized that each student was a unique individual, I wanted them all to emulate me in specific ways. After all, that's why I became a science teacher instead of a science researcher. This, this slide shows two old biology textbooks that I actually taught out of. In those days, the curriculum was your textbook. We wrote our lesson plans based on the pages in the textbook we intended to cover. The department's scope and sequence was a list of the courses the students were required, or in some cases allowed, to take. The first year I taught, the standard curriculum was 9th grade earth science, 10th grade biology, and then optional for the college-bound 11th grade chemistry, and 12th grade either physics or advanced biology. When I was hired, they also requested that I develop a third year, what they called terminal course, for those students not going on to college who needed to take another science course, but for whom chemistry and physics would not be appropriate. I came up with a course called Science in the Home. We went through the house room by room, learning how the various pieces of equipment worked and emphasizing practical science and health-related skills, such as first aid in the bathroom unit, in addition to the fluid dynamics of toilet flushing. And we studied food storage and preparation in the kitchen unit, in addition to the thermodynamics of how refrigerators work. I felt it was important to create a course that would be relevant to the students' lives as adults. It must have worked, because several parents later told me, "I wish I'd had that course when I was in school." This slide shows a montage of covers of Scientific American magazines. We all knew the importance of reading. That was one of the pillars of education in the Amana colonies. Most of my students read pretty well. I required quarterly book reports on books or articles out of my Scientific American collection that related in some way to the material that we were studying in science class. I enlisted the school's part-time K-12 librarian to assist me in making reading lists. She was really excited because a content area teacher, other than the language arts teacher, was encouraging her to buy more up-to-date books. I think the idea of reading and writing in science class grew on the students. At least, I hope it did. Here's a picture of the Amana Lily Lake. Science teachers at the high school level 40 years ago were pressing hard for recognition of the importance of what we then called hands-on learning. We de-emphasized lectures and assigned readings, and we encouraged the use of laboratory exercises and field trips. My biology students enjoyed our trips to the Lily Lake to collect specimens and learn about aquatic ecology. Field trips didn't have to involve walking. Sorry, there was no school bus transportation back then for field trips. I took my earth science students on imaginary field trips. We used geography films. Oh gosh, I remember those old reel-to-reel projectors. We used the geography films to explore the far reaches of the world. And this shows a spark timer physics experiment. My physics students did laboratory experiments also. Here's one we did to look at acceleration. For those who've never done this experiment, we had a wheeled cart, it's labeled mass M2 in the picture on the left, tied to a string that went over the edge of the table. Mass M1 was attached to the other end of the string. If mass M1 were released, it would drop to the floor and pull the cart along the table. It was certainly a noisy laboratory. A long, thin strip of paper was attached to the back of the cart, and that strip of paper ran through a slot in the timer. The timer made sparks at regular time intervals that burned tiny little holes in the paper tape as it slid past. As the cart sped up, due to the acceleration by gravity of the dropping mass, the distances between the spark holes on the paper tape increased. The students measured the distances between the spark holes. Make sense? Please type yes in nearby chat if you have an idea of how this experiment was set up. I'm wondering if there are any physics teachers here. Oh, good. That's good to see. We've got quite a few yeses. Oh, and Milton has done this experiment. Yay, Milton. Thank you. That's wonderful to see. Whoops. Okay, I'm going to get this straightened out sooner or later. Go in the right direction. I'm going backwards through the slides. We'll get there. Sorry about this, folks. Almost. There we are. Because this slide shows a slide rule. And this is the good part. This is the use of technology in science teaching. We didn't have calculators or computers. We used slide rules to multiply and divide. I think the kids used their fingers to add and subtract. Teaching your students how to use the slide rule was an important part of science instruction. And Grizzler remembers that. Okay, this slide shows graph paper and a ruler because graphing, that was all done laboriously with paper and pencil and ruler on special graph paper that we had to provide because the students didn't have any, bringing back memories for Isa, and also lots of erasing. Those were the technology days. I remember learning how to use a slide rule, and I felt that I'd learned something really important, Riven is saying. That's great. So our next picture is of plastic model of the human body. We used plastic models to demonstrate things we could not see for ourselves, such as the insides of the human body, or cell components, or the elements of the solar system. And this is a picture of two people addressing an audience. Professional development for our K-12 teachers back then consisted of a day before school opened in the fall and a day in the middle of spring when our school administration would invite some quote-unquote motivational guest speaker in. Yawn. Rarely could I figure out what the things I participated in on those student release days had anything to do with my life in the classroom. I almost never got to speak with another science teacher other than the local man who had taught junior high school science in that building out of the same textbook for the last decade. And this is a picture of the map of the Iowa area education agencies. The state of Iowa did provide multi-county level educational assistance called Area Education Agencies, or AEAs. Staff at these AEAs provided phone consulting and occasional site visits to help us do a better job of teaching. They also trucked out reels of educational tapes, films, on a weekly loan basis. And if you were teaching how to use those newfangled computer thingies that took up whole rooms, your students would blacken in ovals on cardboard cards. You'd ship the cardboard cards on a truck to the AEA. And 2 weeks later, you'd get back a long folded sheet of striped green and white paper, which usually contained only an error message because they had blackened in an incorrect oval. And this picture shows a sign for the Iowa School for the Deaf and the logo for the Iowa Department for the Blind. I'm sure there were some so-called special students in some of the Iowa school districts back then. Special students in those days were almost always excluded from regular classrooms. They were often sent away to segregated residential schools where supposedly their learning needs would be better met. If, for some reason, they were kept in local schools, which was mostly because their behavior was innocuous, they were simply passed up from grade to grade with no expectations that they would learn. Most of the learners I had were average learners. Some were obviously brighter than others. But there were a few students in the school who were not average learners. One was a young woman with what would now be considered Down syndrome. Back then, we just knew she was what we called slow. She was not to be expected to do any more in her classes than just sit quietly and not bother anyone. She did, however, know all the basketball stats for all the pro and all the college teams. She also was the school's athletic team mascot. She sat proudly on the bench with the rest of the team at all the home games. I recall another unique student. She really struggled with reading. But she was probably my most attentive student I've ever had. She would lean forward in her seat, and she hung on every word of my lectures as if they were drops of water in the desert. My fledgling interest in students with learning difficulties was piqued when I realized she was asking questions that began, Mrs. K, yesterday you said, and today you said, so does that mean, Obviously, her memory and thought processes were much more advanced than her reading or spelling abilities. I contacted the AEA Special Needs Assistance Person. There was only one for several counties. And I asked that the girl be tested. Several months later, her parents and teachers were called in for a meeting with the ADA person. This was the first her parents had heard of this. He gave us a diagnosis. She was bright, but severely learning disabled. The label on her new school file said LD in big red letters. Today, we would say that she was gifted and dyslexic. She was elated to know that she wasn't stupid. She smiled at me and bubbled, "It's okay. I'm one of those DL people." I didn't want to dampen her enthusiasm by correcting her. This is a picture of the National Science Education Standards book cover. Times change, and I changed as well. My experiences with the varied students in my science classes in the Amana colonies prompted me to pursue a second career and additional certification in special education. Oh, DL is delight in learning. That's great, Oro. After a while, science pulled me back, but this time in a role as a provider of professional development. About 20 years ago, the mantra for teachers had become guide on the side, not sage on the stage. That's very appropriate for this conference. Accomplishing this sea change in the methods of instruction used by most science and mathematics teachers would take persistent research-based professional development. That need led eventually to my helping set up the Eisenhower Regional Science and Mathematics Consortia, which were groups of national-level professional development providers across the U.S. In 1996, the National Research Council released the National Science Education Standards. That's the picture you're seeing. These guidelines for K-12 science education helped teachers set learning goals for their students. The standards strongly influenced textbook contents. They also acted as rigorous professional development goals for teachers. To facilitate professional change that would help science and mathematics teachers better address the new educational standards, I edited and wrote for the handbook called Ed Thoughts: What We Know About Science, Teaching, and Learning. Personal charisma no longer had as strong a role in providing professional development as it had done in the past. Instead, we were trying to offer practical advice based on research outcomes. This is a photo of President Bush signing the ADA legislation with Justin Dart looking on. As I became more involved with professional development and research, and less involved with the day-to-day activities of the science classroom, I was pleased to see that the civil rights approach to individual differences was spreading in our society. On July 26, 1990, President Bush signed the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, into law, and you can celebrate that on Friday. Although PL 94-142, doesn't that roll trippingly off the tongue? It's also known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. That had been in existence since 1975, but it was its reframing as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, in 1990 that paved the way for children with disabilities to be educated in public school settings with their age peers. This would have been an exciting time to be in the classroom. Exciting and challenging. Most K-12 classroom teachers were ill-prepared to receive students with higher levels of disability into their classroom, especially now that these students were expected to learn along with their age peers. However, it was still uncommon in the 1990s for students with disabilities to enter post-secondary education. It went backwards again. There we are at the VWBPE logo. But I don't get to do any of that anymore. Now I spend my time as Gentle Heron in Second Life. However, I do get to observe some wonderful educators at work here in the virtual world. Let me show you how education has evolved into this virtual setting. This is a word cloud extracted from the Common Core documents. Curriculum standards continue to evolve. Now, K-12 educators are dealing with a new set of educational standards called the Common Core State Standards. These standards apply to English, language arts, and mathematics, and will soon apply to history, science, and technology. Although these new standards emphasize use of text, both reading and writing, in all content areas at all grade levels, there are other key terms as well, including understanding, information, and relationships. Let's look at the data we collected about how long we have been teaching. Were I still teaching, I'd ask the students to create a graph from the raw data, but the handy tool behind me has already done that for us, so you may want to look at the tool. Here's what I see in the bar graph. Percent never having taught, 10%. Percent who are a newcomer, up to 5 years of experience. %. Percent with 6 to 10 years of experience, 13%. Percent who have 11 to 20 years of experience, oh, we're getting there, 27%. Percent who have 21 to 30 years of experience, 17%. And finally, the percent over 30 years of teaching experience is 13%. So let's do a quick activity with this data. I know it's early in the morning for some people on the west coast of the US, but grab your coffee cup and let's work. Those who are sitting in the west bleachers, I want you to please use the data to predict professional development needs for teachers in the next 10 years. I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that while the other folks are thinking. If you're sitting in the south bleachers, which is directly in front of me, please explain the overall shape of the graph and why it's not even in all the categories. Why aren't we flat across the top graph? Why are there the dips and panels and hills like that? And I'll give you a chance to think while the other groups are thinking as well. And those in the east bleachers, you're not getting away free. Please explain if you think the shape of this graph would parallel the shape of a similar graph made at a meeting of doctors, or if you disagree with that. Do you think the graph would be the same for doctors as for educators, or not, and why? And so I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time to think, maybe a little bit more time to think, because this is interesting data. It is not how I had predicted it would turn out. Those of you who don't know which section you're sitting in, can you please think of another question you might ask about this data? That's always a good question to ask students. So go. When you have thought out an answer to the question that you've been asked, please post it in nearby chat, and I'll try and read a few of these. Let's see what we all come up with. I'm going to pause for a little bit here and read a few of the questions. Milton is saying it's bimodal. That's a good word for meaning it has two peaks and a valley in the center. Has anyone else got some ideas about the data? Let's see what we can put into the nearby chat. I'm pausing for typing. That means you all are supposed to be typing. You're supposed to be awake. Okay. And Oro says, frustration in the first 5 years causes many to leave teaching. Ah, that's a good observation. Biker says there is a need for stronger peer collaboration among teachers of different disciplines. Oh, Biker, I know you're not a science teacher, and I'm glad to hear you say that. Riven says, except for the valley at 6 to 10, it is very close to a standard bell curve. And that is actually more what I expected, was a bell curve. Who else has some ideas? Bill is saying, is it population variation, baby boom in the US, or culture put a person in the moon in the 60s. That certainly had to do with the boom in science teacher enrollment back then. Milton says if we draw a line of best fit, we'd get a normal distribution. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, this is cool. You guys have great ideas. Let's have a couple more. Can a couple more people put some ideas out here? I see more of you out there, and I know you're not all asleep. 8-bit biologist says, I don't believe the years of experience has an impact on time of professional development needed. Oh, that's an interesting observation, too. Maybe on the type of professional development that is needed. Zinnia says 11 to 20 would include the Gen X folks, which is the most educated generation. And she's in there right at the top end with 20 years of teaching. Hi, Zinnia. Well, that was a really interesting exercise. Perhaps as you attend other sessions at this conference, you'll find data that corroborate or refute your initial thoughts. Thank you very much for participating in the exercise. And 8-bit biologist adds in the professional development needed is on a new way of teaching that will be new equally to most experience levels. Bikers thinking that how does one define most educated? And Oro can't afford to retire after 20 years. Well, a lot of us have that issue. So we're going on to the next slide. And this shows two students using computers. The emphasis on reading by the K-12 Common Core standards is facilitated by easy access to the internet nowadays. An incredible volume and variety of print and illustration resources reside on the internet. Our students today are almost all facile with computers, electronic calculators, smartphones, and tons of other devices I couldn't have imagined when I began teaching. There are wonderful tools available to us in the virtual worlds too, including slide and video projectors, text display tools, voting tools, building tools, all kinds of tools. However, although I taught how to use a slide rule and how to use a microscope, learning those skills, learning about those tools was never the point of my instruction. We used the slide rules and microscopes and all the other science tools to explore our world. That was my goal. Proper use of the appropriate tool was a foundation of the science curriculum in the classroom and in the field as well. Students learned to use non-electronic tools such as sling psychrometers to measure air humidity and Secchi discs to measure water turbidity on our trips to the Lily Lake. Grisla says her students, they know certain tech like games and textings, but not practical software like MS Office. That's a very good point. In science classes today, both of those tools, the sling psychrometer and the Secchi disc, have been replaced by electronic measuring devices. Not only the tools, but the setting for learning has changed. Over the past years, education has evolved to include learning within a virtual world environment. This is a snapshot of two scientific models in Second Life. Riven says learning MS Office is today's equivalent to the typing classes that we took way back when in high school. Virtual worlds offer the chance to build large-scale models of small-scale objects and vice versa. Here you see on the left a snapshot of cells inside the testis making sperm. And on the right, you see a model of the solar system. Both large and small segments of nature are made available at appropriate scales for students to explore in virtual worlds. This is a couple of snapshots from geography in Second Life, a waterfall and a volcano. Nowadays, there is generally less funding for external field trips, but there are more fantastic opportunities in virtual worlds. Here on the left, you see a waterfall in a Second Life area that's devoted to water studies. And on the right, you see an active volcano streaming lava. You can take your students to see desert plants or pollution at the bottom of the ocean as easily as you can sign in with an avatar. Oh, here we go backwards again. There we are. Second Life snapshots of a patient in a respiratory hospital ward and of chemical molecules. Laboratory activities can be conducted in virtual worlds as well as realistic field trips. Again, these can be made at any scale. On the left, you see a training hospital where medical students learn to diagnose respiratory conditions from medical data about simulated patients. On the right are chemical ball and stick models of various simple molecules. Chemistry students can learn about molecular geometry using those simulations. And here we have a word cloud of special education terminology. As more students with special educational needs enter our classrooms, both K-12 and post-secondary, we must focus more closely on their needs. The term IEP that features prominently in this word cloud stands for Individualized Education Plan. And 8-Bit Biologist said we need to make areas more accessible to the sub-16 crowd. Can talk to Linden Lab about that. K-12 educators in content area classrooms need to be familiar with students' IEPs and the way the IEPs are structured to communicate the students' support requirements. In post-secondary settings, the student must advocate for his or her own needs. Instructors at this level can turn to the Campus Disability Services Office, and it may have different names on different campuses, but look to them for assistance in figuring out how to address student needs. The differences between then and now: more data is available on student needs to facilitate their learning. More students with more diverse needs are in all our classrooms, K through college, and students with additional learning needs now have legal protections that will allow them to be educated with their age peers to their highest level of accomplishment. And that means ensuring that all educational venues, including those in virtual worlds, are accessible to all your students. Okay, let's see if we can get it to go forward. There. This slide shows an in-world presentation. Professional development for teachers has evolved as well. In-world college classes are readily available to all of us, and your classmates are as likely to live around the world as they are to live around the corner from your home. I think this increased opportunity for diversity among colleagues can help us do a better job of appreciating the diversity of students in our classes. The development of communities of practice, which now can be international and face-to-face at the same time, has greatly strengthened educator professional development. Opportunities such as this conference, the CESL conference, and educational and professional presentations too numerous to count make virtual worlds a thriving environment for educators' lifelong learning. I chose this snapshot because the slide the presenter is showing is titled, First, Why Virtual Worlds? That's another great question to ponder during this conference. This shows a classroom with empty desks. How long have we been educators? We saw the data we collected about ourselves. I think most of us who are older, and I'm proud to include myself in that number, are still educators long after retiring. And most of us were educating well before we first entered the classroom as a student teacher, because we educate as family members. Lady Slipper agrees. We educate as friends. We educate as volunteers and in whatever career we currently hold. Education isn't just in classrooms, is it? I doubt it ever was restricted to desks and chalkboards. This is a call to action, and it shows a trumpeter. So what is the role of the educator? Has it changed over the past 4 decades? Have best practices in education evolved to keep pace with the changes in educational venues? Or do they even need to change? Have we gotten beyond the stage? That is the purpose of this conference, to help us answer these questions. So let's go to more sessions and find out. Thank you very much for your attention this morning, and I think we have time for a few questions, Letty. Is that right?
Yes, I believe you're correct, Gentle. So if anybody has any questions for her, please go ahead and convey them through text chat, and she will respond to you.
Oh, Biker says I'm only 29 still. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. We're looking for questions here. Put the questions in chat, and Lori Vaughn is going to help by typing me talking. Agile Bill says mobile learning ahead of its time was cool. I don't know if it was mobile learning. Carl says, thank you for making me feel younger than I am with the section on slide rules. Oh, Carl, I'll talk to you sometime about how to teach slide rules. Yeah, that was pretty fun. I used to teach slide rules by showing an addition analog, because if you slide meter sticks along each other as if they were the slider and the stationary part of the slide rule, you can do addition just like you do multiplication on a slide rule, because the slide rule is on yeah, because the slide rule is on a logarithmic scale. Carl will understand that. Milton is asking if massively open online courses are a good or bad idea. Milton, they're both. This is my opinion. They're a good idea because they make education available to more of us, but they're a bad idea when the monitors and the aides are given 1,000 students to help with, and that's just an impossible task. And Biker says, I shouldn't feel old for using a slide rule because he's still using an abacus. And the Wireframe project says the graph paper brought back a lot of bad memories. I'm sorry, Wireframe. I love graph paper. I still work on it. Ribbon says MOOCs are a new thing. They are still evolving and working out the bugs. That's absolutely true. Euro Minuteman asks, why is interest in virtual worlds declining in Google Trends virtual worlds, and has posted a URL? I don't think it has. Marcus says MOOCs might be good provided they do not use the same old classroom principles and don't foster the notion of transmitting some content to the students. Zinnia asks the question, what can we do to encourage more educators to get educated in the future of education? And Zinnia, I think the answer to your question is each one teach one. I no longer believe in the inoculation theory of professional development, that I can fly into your town, give a 2-hour speech, and fly out, and you'll be miraculously changed to a wonderful teacher. I don't believe that. What I think is that if I can influence one person to improve their teaching, to use research-based strategies for instruction, then that's a major accomplishment. Odd Professor is lamenting that my work has been dismissed by colleagues as playing games, and that's unfortunate. That is very unfortunate. Kelly says she awaits the research before making up her mind about MOOCs. Her worry is that the history of MOOCs is being rewritten, and that may be a worry, but it may be a good thing too, Callie. Bill says our virtual world trends, people don't understand the need for spatial context, why we are different than a webcam. When they do, they're going to return to 3D. Roxy says she tried pitching virtual worlds to her local college as a teaching tool and got the same reaction. Okay. Carl is asking for my opinion about Pay It Forward, the higher education finance system in Australia and Oregon. Carl, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. And the other Carl says the existence of graph paper was integral to how pen and paper Dungeons and Dragons was designed. Pen and paper D&D was integral to how the first MMOs were designed, and the first MMOs were integral to how SL was designed. That's an interesting piece of history. Okay, and are we... there is an echo, I think. At least in the text, there's an echo. Letty, how are we doing on time?
I believe we still have about 10 more minutes, Jenna.
Okay, that's great. So Euro Minuteman says, why is Philip Rosedale basically scrambling on a catch-up track to build Third Life, a cinema class platform called High Fidelity? Okay, and let's see. There were some up further that I didn't get. Tully says, my campus just spent a lot of money to send several of us to Las Vegas for BB World. I can't help but think how much more economical a virtual conference would have been. Oh, Tully, what a marvelous statement. And much smaller carbon footprint, too. Riven says, Minecraft seems to be a much easier sell to K-12 schools than other virtual worlds are, but it really does sell as playing an educational game. Carl asks, this is an interesting question, what is the source of my empathy? How did I become Gentle Heron? Gosh, I don't know. I have always felt, I guess you would call it a kind of empathy, a connection to other people. And I think that helped me with my initial students when I was a very young new teacher and wasn't very much older than they were. And I think it's the same today. Several people are saying playing is learning. That's absolutely true. Roxy responding to James, he never visioned Second Life as a teaching tool. He built a playground for himself and his buddies. Oh, let's see. Agile Bill says regarding games, Dr. Kevin Verbach's MOOC on gamification had 80,000 people, so games may catch on. Oh, that's a lot of people to have in one course. 8-Bit Biologist said South Carolina has a charter school up for acceptance this August for an entirely open sim school, and that would be huge to further education in virtual worlds at the K-12 level. And 8-Bit Biologist, yes, I am familiar with several K-12 schools in open sim environments that are charter schools. There are some public schools that also have at least classes in the open sim environment. Can't do it. Yeah, Noble Academy. And Euro Minuteman is citing the ERIC database and looking at best practices. There are 716 hits for looking at outcome and accountability. Home teachers, Oro says, are making use of virtual environments. That's also true. And Grisla says there is a school in Georgia. Roxy wonders how they will make sure the kids are not watching TV or sleeping while they're logged on. And Roxy, I would say probably the same way that I made sure you were not sleeping when I was doing the activity. You don't just lecture. Milton says, at what pace should we push forward with innovative ideas in education, especially in virtual worlds? Is there a risk of leaving behind the less able? Milton, there is, and that is a concern. There's definitely a concern about leaving behind the less socioeconomically able who cannot afford computers. Let's see, and we have Odd Professor saying, I've thought that virtual labs are a natural for students in far-flung rural areas. I totally agree with that. 8-Bit Biologist responding to Roxy, that's where pedagogy and professional development focused on virtual worlds comes in. Hooray, I am all for that. Joe K agrees with Agile Bill. There are 11,400,000-ish players in Minecraft. Many of them are students and many learning very tangible skills from the Minecraft community. That is absolutely true, Joe Kay. Let's see. Riven says, and even if you can afford a computer, you may not be able to afford a high-end graphics computer or a very fast internet connection, which are required for both virtual worlds and video-based online courses. Zinnia's students taught her Minecraft. Roxy says, no offense, but I was the expert in slacking off in my school under the nose of the teacher. I would have had a field day if I was just sitting at a computer and no teacher to see me. And Euro Minute Man is talking about the physics engine in Gary's Mod 13. 8-Bit Biologist says the trend for Chromebooks is not helping the cause until we get more browser-based virtual worlds. And I think we're about at the end of our time so that we have a chance for people to get to their 9 o'clock sessions. I want to thank everyone again and thank Letty for introducing and keeping time, and thank everyone for participating. Have a great time at the conference, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Give her some applause, please. She was an excellent introduction to our conference. We will be getting started soon. We have the next session in a few minutes, but I would like to thank all of you for coming. And I hope that this will be one of the best conferences you've ever attended. Thank you all very much, and welcome.